Hello and welcome. We're here at the Post-Roe America Conference 2023 with the Institute for Faith and Freedom. My name is Grace Riley, and today I am joined by Dr. Carl Trueman. Dr. Trueman is a professor of the humanities at Grove City College and a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C. He was born in Dudley in the United Kingdom and grew up in the idyllic rural surroundings of the West Country. He has previously been a faculty member at the Universities of Nottingham and Aberdeen in the UK and Westminster Theological Seminary. From 2012 to 2018, he was also a pastor of Cornerstone Presbyterian Church in Ambler, PA, and in his spare time, he runs, listens to rock and classical music, and does what his wife tells him. So thank you so much, Dr. Trueman, for joining me.
Great to be here, Grace. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So you'll be talking, I believe it's tomorrow, so tomorrow for the conference you'll be talking about why the weakest argument remains the strongest and why abortion is likely to stay. Can you tell us a bit about that and why abortion's likely to stay?
Yeah, well, the origin of the talk lies in an essay I read by the English Christian ethicist Oliver O'Donovan. I think he wrote it in the 1980s, but he was reflecting then upon the shifts that had taken place in abortion in the 1960s and 70s. And he made a very intriguing comment, and his comment was this, that the argument that he thought was really unworthy of addressing, the argument that he thought was the weakest pro-abortion argument out there, turned out to be the really decisive one in winning the public debate. Now, the weakest argument was that the baby in the womb is merely part of the woman's body. O'Donovan had thought in the 60s that this was was so ridiculous, it was not even really worth addressing. And yet, as we all know, it sort of carried the day in the wider social imagination.
It became the slogan of their entire position, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, it is the foundation, really, of pro-abortion thinking in many ways. And I think what O'Donovan is pointing to there is the fact that the abortion debate is not based upon rational, reasonable, principled discussion. It's much more driven by emotions. I think on both sides of the issue, it's driven a lot by emotions. And the reason why the weakest argument proved to be the strongest, of course, is that the weakest argument tapped into the notion of humanity that really emotionally grips the contemporary imagination. And that is the idea that human beings are free, self-determining agents, and all relationships are contractual.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's so interesting about that, I think, is that the art of conversation and debate, so what would be had about this that wasn't necessarily as emotional, has been lost largely in our culture. And one of the things you spoke about last year at the annual conference for the Institute for Faith and Freedom was how we as a culture are having a bit of trouble finding a unifying moral vision, and how that's decayed and led to a more secular culture. How do you think this plays into abortion?
Well, I think we are not helped by the rise of information technology and to use the sort of trendy terminology, the disembodied way in which most of us engage with other people these days. It's very pleasant to be sitting here talking to you face to face in an embodied fashion. And it's a different kind of conversation to the sort of conversation that might be pursued online. When you pursue a conversation online, there's a lot of body language you miss, but it's also much easier and much cheaper to ignore somebody, to ignore their views, or to treat them with disrespect. And I think whereas we're moving into an era in the West where most of the big debates seem to be taking place online, it doesn't surprise me that the broad moral imagination is crumbling, because the broad moral imagination originated in face-to-face interactions, originated in embodied interactions that are no longer the standard currency of discussion today.
Yeah, and I see that in my generation especially. I mean, it's sad to me growing up where the most prevalent form of communication would be to stick your head in your phone and not talk to people that are right in front of you. And social media has certainly contributed and been addictive for a lot of young people, where everyone posts everything they do online and kind of creates their identity online and goes out from there rather than it being the other way around. So it certainly is a big problem that then draws to a lot of other issues. And looking at this, it does seem, as we've talked about a little bit, it does seem broadly that because our culture has become so secular, we've completely lost the idea that human beings are made in the image of God. And also sense that, again, going back to that first point about the weakest pro-choice argument being that the fetus is part of the woman's body, it seems we've completely lost the moral and even scientific reality of a baby being its own being and created by God and having its own unique DNA and scientifically being its own life. So I guess with that, what impact do you think that has?
Well, I think, again, going back to social media, we now intuitively think of ourselves as free, independent, and autonomous. Mm-hmm. We intuitively think of other people as, first and foremost, problematic until they prove otherwise. So I think we're against not just an argument, we're up against a whole way of life that presses against the idea of human beings being embodied, dependent, and presses us towards thinking of ourselves as liberated, free, and autonomous. I think what we need to do is realize that that has to shape the strategies we adopt in making our case. It's very striking, of course, that with the advent of sonograms, people became less gung-ho about abortion once sonograms became common. A sonogram is not an argument. A sonogram is a picture that appeals to our intuitions. Hey, the baby in the womb looks like a person. It becomes easier to imagine that the baby is a person with rights at that point. If you look at the backlash against the Dobbs decision last year, the backlash was not really rooted in arguments. It was rooted in stories and narratives. The tragic stories of young girls who are pregnant because of rape or because they've been even raped by their own fathers or brothers, and there's incest involved. And those stories tug on our heartstrings and are very, very powerful and in many ways very persuasive in terms of the abortion argument. So I think on the pro-life side, we need to realize that the terms of engagement need to focus, I won't say less on arguments. Arguments are important, but we need to realize that if we're going to win the battle for the popular vote, if you like, we have to win the battle for the popular imagination. And that requires us having equally, if not more, powerful stories to be able to tell that will pull on the heartstrings of those listening.
Yeah, that is a really great point. And I think especially considering the fact that there are a lot of women that are hurting. There are a lot of women who are kind of misguided or don't know where to go. And the pro-choice message is selling the big lie that if we don't have abortion legal in the United States, women won't have any rights, that it will hurt them tremendously, that people are trying to control their bodies, which that's a scary thing for women who are just trying to live their lives. So I think you're right that on the pro-life side, we need to recognize that and connect with those women who would be pro-life otherwise, but are just constantly hearing all of this rhetoric and emotional argument, in a sense, coming at them from every angle.
Yes, I think the truth is that if somebody holds a position for reasons other than being persuaded by an argument is not going to persuade them necessarily to change their position. We need to appropriate that, we need to understand that and act accordingly.
Yeah, a very, very good point, and I hope a lot of people are listening on the pro-life side, because I think, again, that's advice that we could really largely take. But just before we end, I just want to talk about your book a little. Can you tell people a bit about the book we have displayed here? And you also have quite a few other books that you've written, but just about this book and where people can find it and find the rest of your work.
Yeah, well, my sort of weekly work can be found at First Things or at World magazine online. So that's where people can go to read my sort of op-ed kind of stuff. This book originated in my interest in the question as to how the statement, "I'm a woman trapped in a man's body," has come to make intuitive sense to so many people. I didn't realize at the time that I was not even aware of Oliver O'Donovan's comment about the weakest argument being the strongest argument. But essentially what this book does is tell part of the story of how the Western society is developed in such a way that intuitions and feelings, psychological states, have come to have such authority in the way we think about ourselves. That has implications not only for the trans issue or for the LGBTQ movement, but also for abortion. And I think also for human beings in general. It's not that the church is immune from this kind of thinking. So that was the burden of the book, trying to explain how we've reached the position where things that are difficult to argue for have yet become matters of intuitive public orthodoxy.
Absolutely, and the rise and triumph of the modern self and cultural amnesia, that's a topic, and as you're explaining, that's very relevant today when things that are true and objective seem to have suddenly become subjective in what some would call reality. So it certainly is very interesting and a very relevant book and topic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And everyone be sure to check out Dr. Trueman's books and work. You will not regret it. And thank you so much for joining me.
It's very kind of you to say so. Thanks very much, Grace.
Thank you.
For more information on the Institute for Faith and Freedom, visit faithandfreedom.com.